Welcome to Libero, the podcast about the most important of the least important things. As I think it was Evangelist Marinakis who said that. This is episode 43, if anybody's still counting, which I don't think we are anymore. I'm Jonathan Wilson, and I'm joined today by John Brewin of The Guardian and Jack Pitt-Brooke of The Athletic. Did we have a nice weekend, John? You were at the Community Shield. Nice to be back.
Oh, yeah. Good game as well. A game that showed that football is not played in the transfer market, as we've discussed many times. Liverpool, bad in defence. I've seen this before, haven't you? Where team goes out, spends loads on attackers, and then thinks, oh shit, what about the defence? And if I was a Liverpool fan, I'd be slightly concerned about that.
Yeah, me too. Jack, you went to Dulwich Hamlet. A crushing victory over Dartmouth, was it?
Dartford,
sorry.
Started this season's promotion push from trying to get back out of the Isthmian League into National League South. Started really well. So new manager, they've cut the wage bill. They brought back lots of old players, including the legendary Nyron Clunas back in as captain. Luke Winadio scored a hat-trick. We beat Dartford 4-0. All is well in the world.
Well, I went to the Freud Museum yesterday. So if you're on the tube to Hampstead, if you're wandering across the heath, or perhaps you're just waiting for somebody to finish telling you about their dreams, why don't you turn to the person next to you and evangelise about us? Please do remember to rate, review and recommend us. And in supremely exciting news, and I know John in particular is really, really happy about this, we're launching a Libero Fantasy League this week. I think it's fair to say that some of us are keener players than others. I mean, John literally said, I'd rather know how many nectar points you have. So if you do want to message him on social media to let him know, he'd be delighted. But if that is your thing, it's not mine, I'll be honest, but if that is your thing, there will be a link in the episode description. And we do have at least one very keen player who'll be taking charge of Libero team, and that is producer Tom. So if it's terrible, blame him. And if it's great, we'll all take the credit, because that's how it works.
You mentioned dreams there, Jonathan, and I always say this about Fantasy League, that remember there's that Oscar Wilde phrase, which was, there's no worse start to a conversation than I had this great dream last night. Well, there actually is, which is I've got X in my fantasy team.
I actually haven't. I'm considering taking it back up. I used to play it all the time when I was younger, but I found they've overcomplicated the game a bit, and you now have to. It demands so much of you as a player that I kind of lost interest. Also, I liked having a funny name, because doesn't everyone? I tried to fit in Andre Mariner's apartment complex about 5 or 6 years ago, and it didn't fit. It was too many characters. But if I can come up with a funny name this year, I will re-enter and take on the other Libero listeners.
Oh, that's something very much to look forward to. But I think something we can all get excited by is the fact that the Premier League starts again this weekend. I think in the second podcast we do this week, we'll look a bit more closely at Liverpool and Arsenal, last season's top two. We went into some detail about Manchester City in the Guardiola podcast last week. So today what we're going to do, we're going to try and identify the 5 big questions about the season to come. So the first one we came up with, last season was a good season for the Premier League's middle classes. You had Forest, Brighton, Brentford, Fulham, Bournemouth, all looking very competitive at various times. Yeah, Forest looking like they're getting the Champions League. And there's a little bit similar to 2015-16, when not only did you have Leicester winning the title, but you also had Southampton and West Ham finishing in the top 7. And what happened in the summer of 2016 was the big clubs all went out, had these splurges and said, right, this isn't happening again. We're going to reassert ourselves. And is there a slight sense that something similar has happened this summer, Jack?
Not quite on the same scale. I think that the summer of 2016 was probably the biggest kind of collective bar raising that we've ever seen in the Premier League, just in the sense that 2016 is obviously when Guardiola came to City, Conte went to Chelsea, Mourinho went to Man United, and obviously Klopp had gone to Liverpool in October the previous season, so he'd only really just got his feet under the door there. Under the desk? I'm not sure what the phrase is, but you know what I mean. So you had all these, basically all the big teams went out and got good managers, and having 15-16 was a season in which the good teams were really, really bad looking back. Arsenal blew the title, Spurs were too young, City were old and tired, it's Pellegrini's third and final year. Van Gaal's the end of Van Gaal's time at Man United. Chelsea had the Mourinho season. So all the big teams were really bad in 15-16. They went out and got new managers, and then really every Premier League title since then has been won by either Klopp or Conte or Guardiola or Arne Slot with Klopp's Liverpool team. So it's one of the really big turning points, I think, in the Premier League. What we've seen this year, I mean, it's not really on the same scale, is it? Because Chelsea and Man United have gone and bought a lot of players, but neither of them have changed their manager. Like, so much of the Premier League in the last few years has been Chelsea and Man United underperforming, really, which effectively has created the space to have teams like Newcastle, Villa, Tottenham finish in the Champions League places. But if Chelsea and Man United get their act together and have a strong season this year, then suddenly I think the Premier League will, that space won't exist, that space for teams from outside of the absolute elite to finish in the Champions League places. And that, I think, is the thing to watch.
What we have seen, though, is that clutch of middle-class sides, for want of a better term, they have all sold at least one player upwards. So you've had Forest selling Elanga to Newcastle, Brighton have sold João Pedro to Chelsea. I mean, Brighton selling players to Chelsea, I guess, that is the way of the world. Brentford have sold Bryan Mbeumo to United and Norgard to Arsenal, possibly Wissa as well, leaving maybe to Newcastle. They lost Thomas Frank to Spurs as well, which is part of that same process. Bournemouth have sold Kerkez to Liverpool, Dean Howson to Madrid. They've lost Kepa, who was on loan there last season. Even if you're Fulham, although you haven't really directly lost anybody, I think you'd be particularly upset to lose. But they lost Polinia last summer, and they look across London and, there he is turning up on loan at Tottenham because he only managed 6 games for Bayern last season, which just seems this, a particularly sort of cruel example of sort of a natural order reasserting itself. That, sorry, you can't have him. It's just going to go to a club with bigger history and more money. So John, before we get to Chelsea United, how do you think that sort of clutch of teams in mid-table are looking? Is this sort of just the inevitable economic process, or is this something slightly bigger that is going to cause a few of them problems?
Well, let's start with Brentford. They're the ones that I fear for the most because, well, we aren't going to recognise them from last season. And one of the reasons we're not going to recognise them is because Thomas Frank is not in charge. And we also have a rookie manager in charge, don't we? Good old Keith. Who we've probably all spoken to on Irish radio, as Keith Andrews, I should say. And they are taking a risk there, but they are trusting the process that Matthew Benham put in place when he started rebuilding that club and rebuilt it to being, from the bus stop in Hounslow to a respected Premier League club, much admired, and unfortunately victims of the rather carrion nature of the Premier League, which is big clubs pick off smaller clubs' players, and that's what's happened. They picked off Thomas Frank, who was the front man, who really, I think that there were several dark periods during Brentford's time in the Premier League over the last 4 seasons, and in each of them it felt like it was Frank that pulled them around with his confidence, with his man management, with his tactics. They're one of the most innovative managers around. They will miss him, and they will miss Bryan Mbeumo. They would miss Johan Wissa if he went, and Norgard was a leader for them. So I do fear for them, but then again, those at Brentford have faith in Phil Giles, the sporting director, and they have faith in Matthew Benham. So let's see about them. Brighton, Brighton almost are impervious to change, aren't they, at this point? They're used to selling players. They do change the manager. There is faith there in Fabian Hürzeler. There will be faith there in the players that are brought in. I'll be watching them this weekend against Fulham. Fulham, there is some concern. As you say, Jonathan, it's a good point. I wonder if those famously voracious, the A3 mob, will take to Joe Palhinha when he returns to Craven Cottage, because that was one that really hurt them. But listen, I'm not sure anyone could say, don't go to Bayern Munich, but go to Bayern Munich and barely play. That was probably a little bit disappointing.
Was it his injuries as well? We should say it was. There was more to it than just him not being quite good enough at that level.
he did struggle, I think, a bit when he did play. I think, as far as I can understand it, that may be to do with the style of play that Vincent Kompany had with them. But Fulham, yeah, they haven't bought any players. I wrote the Guardian preview for them, and you had to talk of a star man coming in, and it was a reserve goalkeeper, Lecomte, who came in. So it's a bit of a worry. The thing is, Marco Silva is a fine manager. He's a good manager at renovating players, but he hasn't really been given any players to renovate. There's a lot expected of Josh King there, but I think the fans of the club are entitled to wonder if that great big stand, Riverside stand, has been the focus of the ownership, and maybe the money's gone in that direction. And as I wrote in the piece on Fulham, I do wonder if treading water is a particularly good idea in the Premier League.
And Jack, did you have a point to make about Palhinha there?
I was going to say that I think the problem that Palhinha had is that it was Thomas Tuchel who wanted to sign him in the first instance, and then back when Tuchel wanted, big proven Premier League guys, and then obviously Big Vin comes in and wants to play possession football, and if you want to play Guardiola style possession football, you don't really need a guy who runs around kicking people. And I love Palhinha, but he's just not a stylistic fit for that style of play. And I think he got there having been signed by Tuchel, and then all of a sudden Kompany thinks, well, what am I meant to do with this guy? As Pep said, I'm not a coach for the tackles, and Palhinha is very much a man for the tackles.
And then Bournemouth fascinating because we're losing 3 of that very good back 5, if you include the keeper as part of it. That's obviously a big problem for them. The thing I was surprised, and I guess with all these clubs, it's sort of built into the model. They know that they're buying to sell on. You then have to have a very good process, and Brighton have been exceptionally good at this. But it only takes 1 or 2 of those deals to go wrong, and they can be left a bit short. And I think because levels are so high in the Premier League, you don't have to drop off by very much to suddenly drop from sort of 10th, 11th, 12th to 15th, 16th, 17th. But the thing that surprised me about Bournemouth is Dango Ouattara apparently wanting to move to Brentford, trying to push through a transfer to Brentford, which at best to me seems a sideways move, John.
Well, I suppose, as someone who's watched quite a bit of Bournemouth over the last year or two, Ouattara was pretty much used as a utility player in the team. He played centre forward. When you remember that point in the season when they were really flying, they didn't have a centre forward. And
scored a load of goals.
Yeah. But Evan Nielsen obviously came back into the team and was restored. Ouattara's shunted to the wing. I think I saw him play fullback in one. So maybe there's a player that actually wants to play in his proper position. You could see him slotting straight into Mbeumo's position, couldn't you? So maybe it's career progression in that fashion, and you would have thought Brentford are offering more money. That's the way football goes, isn't it? That might just be a decision about money. But yeah, Bournemouth are an interesting one. I mean, Dean Howson, it may well be that in a few years we will sit back and wonder how on earth Bournemouth had this guy for a season. Because he is that talented. And Zabani, I think Chelsea were looking at him, as they're looking at everyone, of course, though they don't like to talk about it. But they felt that he wasn't quite up to it. Now he's gone to PSG. Kirkes saw play at Wembley yesterday. Now people at Bournemouth will tell you, he's fantastic going forward. Defensively, well, I think we saw maybe a bit of that in the Community Shield. Ismail Assar had quite a lot of fun against him. But Bournemouth are confident again of bringing in new players and turning things over. I think maybe the problem with them is I think Iraola it might be in the final year of his contract. He sticks to his contract, but we'll have to see whether he's going to stay for longer. A bit of disappointment there last season. I think that they missed out on Europe. It did feel like the goal all year.
Well, they had a real problem finishing off games, didn't they? I mean, I remember the game at Spurs where they really were the better side, should have won and ended up drawing. But so we've sort of looked at the sort of the sort of stepping stone clubs. But Jack, how do you think Manchester United are shaping up this season? I know we talked about Manchester United a lot a couple of weeks ago, so let's not go into this in too much detail. But it seems to me that Benjamin Šeško actually does make quite a difference to their attacking options. but probably still a bit short at the back of midfield.
Yeah, I mean, better, I think. I think they've bought three, maybe they've overpaid, but they've bought three established, good, proven players in Cunha and Bemo and Sesko, who I think are better than the players they're replacing. We could argue all day about whether they're paid more than market value for them. I think there's still huge problems in the squad. I mean, I think that do they have one central midfielder who can do the amount of running you need to do to play in a two in that system? Like, you need unbelievable athletes in there.
I mean, Ugarte is meant to be the one, isn't he? But we didn't see that at all last season, and he looked very shaky. Was it the Everton game in the summer series or whatever it's called when he had a shocker?
So I think they need more. I think they need more in midfield, more at wing back, both sides. Probably more in the back three as well. And I'm not sure about the goalkeeper, but with the front line, they've done okay.
Well, is it not that recruitment teams these days seem to go first for attackers, don't they? That appears to be the way that it goes. The solution in the Premier League for a long time is actually defenders in the Premier League aren't very good. If you've got good attackers, you're halfway there, and that's maybe the solution for surviving relegation. It's also the solution for rising up to the top. Whether it's a solution for being the best, well, that's a different question.
But I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong here, John, but it's such a strange thing to hear said when, for so much of our childhoods, it was always, you build from the back. And you'd also think, I mean, I remember Jurgen Klopp alluded to this after Liverpool had drawn 0-0 against Bayern. When was this? It must be 6 years ago now. And he was talking about the game taking on a more defensive aspect. And I think we have seen goals per game, particularly in Europe, have dropped to an extent. You'd think that people would look at that, and maybe Burnley are trying to do that this season, and said, well, where can we give ourselves a competitive advantage? If other teams aren't defending, we can be the one who defends. And I mean, Burnley's defence last season obviously was exceptional. Whether that can be replicated in the Premier League, I don't know. But why do you think that has flipped, John?
Well, as I say, I think defenders are asked to do a lot more than mere defending, aren't they? That's part of it. So they're supposed to be multidiscipline. That obviously means that they don't concentrate as much on the actual defensive rigours of the game. And also, let's face it, the refereeing of the game is much more in favour of the attacker than it used to be. Can you see the likes of Steve Bruce, Neil Ruddock, or who were good, high quality players of their time, and also good footballers as well. They both could play a bit. Setting aside fitness issues, the way they played the game, that real hard. How many proper hard defenders are there? I mean, Jack's watched Christian Romero is considered probably like the hard man of the Premier League. But he gets sent off a lot because he cannot play at the very edge like that anymore. And I do think that's how it favours attackers. And maybe just scouts just get much more excited. And big execs and, .com billionaires that own football clubs prefer to sign big strikers than a, anchor midfielder like João Palhinha or someone. Apart from Daniel Levy, who, sees that as a great deal.
I mean, I don't know if this is a helpful example, but Liverpool signed Firmino, Mane and Salah before they signed Van Dijk and Alisson. Like, Van Dijk and Alisson were the last two pieces of that jigsaw.
Sure.
And they got the top attacking players in first. I mean, it's just a theory, but might it be the case that people think, to a certain extent, you can... If the team is well structured defensively, you can get to a certain level with average players before you add in the absolute brilliant ones. But if you don't have good attackers, you're just not going to score goals, and you're never going to be competitive. So from a sort of Amarim's Man United standpoint, even if the defensive players aren't very good, we saw last year we've seen for ages really, the limitations if all your attackers are not good enough. But at least now they've brought in three goal scoring players who can make an impact from day one, then that might at least buy them the breathing room to then go and get to go and get the round pegs for the round holes in the rest of the team. And
it's also an entertainment franchise as well, isn't it? Let's remember that. Like fans and buy shirts, want to watch these guys that, they want to watch a Sesko, they want to watch a Cunha. Again, they don't really want to watch a Palhinha. As good a player. Listen, Palhinha, I thought when he was at Fulham was one of the best players in the Premier League, and yet most people wouldn't know who he was. But that's not how it works, is it? This is the Premier League in 2025.
I think you're right. I think there is a low boredom threshold from fans that it's fine if you're winning, but if you're boring and not winning, they will turn. And Louis van Gaal found that. We alluded to that earlier. And somebody else who found that was Enzo Maresca last season. And suddenly Chelsea come back into this season and they're world champions. Very impressive beating Milan yesterday. They're fourth favourites, I think, for the league, Jack. Do we think that's... Do we think that's realistic, or are they a bit better than that? How do you assess them?
Well, it's weird, isn't it? Because I think so many people made up their minds about Maresca's Chelsea kind of early on, probably me included. But the way, it's very difficult to argue with anything they've done really in the last, basically this calendar year. They turned around their league form and came fourth. They, after having that really bad wobble in January, February, they turned around their league form. They came fourth. They won the Conference League and they won the Club World Cup. And on top of that, they've now added João Pedro, Gittins, Esteval, Delap. So tons more firepower in a team that wasn't exactly short of firepower in the first place. Instinctively, I'd say they're not as good as the big three: City, Liverpool, Arsenal. But I don't actually know. I don't actually know how. I don't know how good they would be over the 38-game season. I think the robustness of the big three is sort of proven by now. And I guess this is probably really one of the big questions that we do not know, that we can't know the answer to at this point, is the consistency and robustness of this Chelsea team. Can they, because if they can do it to their top level week in, week out, then of course they can win the league.
I had this sort of sense last season, because they had that very, very good run going through the sort of late autumn, early part of the winter, when it's suddenly like, hang on, why would they not be title challengers? And you look at the squad and you think the squad's incredible. They've got depth everywhere. Left back, maybe not. The one position where they're a bit short. I'm not sure it's an area where they're particularly looking. Levi Colwill being injured maybe gives them a slight shortfall in the middle at the back. It seems they're going after Xavi Simons, which seems an expensive player in a position where they already seem to have a lot, with Neto and with Gittins, but maybe they see a role for him. It's not on the left side.
It's could play more in a centre, can't he, Simons? He would have thought.
Well, he can play either, but so maybe he's back up to Cole Palmer. But that seems a lot of money to spend for somebody to do that. But again, maybe if you're looking at a squad, you say there is Cole Palmer. Is there anybody else who can operate in that number 10 role? Maybe there isn't. So they've worked the PSR in some way that they still have money to spend. I think the midfield at three. Reece James played really well in that three in the Club World Cup, but I would assume he'll return to the back four in ideal sense. It's good that they've got him as cover, but to have Lavia and Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez, that's a really sort of solid, difficult three to get through. That's going to give them a bit of solidity there, as well as the technical quality they all have, particularly Enzo. I'm struggling to work out why I decided they couldn't win the league, because it looks like a league-winning squad. And I think a lot of the problems they had last season, a lot of dissatisfaction Chelsea fans had, would actually have been solved if they'd just taken chances. And I don't want to sort of turn this into slagging off Nicholas Jackson, because I think he's been, in many ways, a victim of the Chelsea project. That he was brought in, he played 16 games in La Liga, and you said, all right, you're the first choice centre forward for a Premier League team who expects to be in the Champions League. It was nonsense. He has to learn from somebody, and he was given nobody to learn from. He was exposed. You saw his confidence go. There was that moment in the Club World Cup final in the second half after he'd come off the bench when he was clean through. Clearly the right thing to do was just to check, square it. Cole Palmer has a tap in, it's 4-0. And the game is, it was done and dusted anyway, but it was absolutely done and dusted. And there's obviously something in his brain saying, I have to score, I have to prove myself. And he drags a shot into the side netting. I think there was some talk that he might be an option off for left, but obviously that's now gone with Gittins coming in. But I just think João Pedro and Liam Delap are both significant upgrades on Nicholas Jackson. And if the domination they often have in games results in going 1-0 up in the first 20 minutes, half hour, suddenly the nature of the game changes. The opposition has to come out more. There's more space. They can pick that off. The fans aren't frustrated. They're, okay, nothing's happening, but we're 1-0 up. I just think that if you look at the underlying stats, they were actually much healthier last season than a lot of the mood around Chelsea. So, John, I don't know. Do you want to mount a defence of Nicholas Jackson? I don't know what the question is from that, but
no. I was going to say we talked of the summer of 2016. Well, who won the title after that? After this great big, revolutionary summer, it was a Chelsea team that came through and won the title under Antonio Conte. I think last season there was a lot of doubt in Enzo Maresca, wasn't there? There was this idea that he could only play one style of play. I'm not sure that's changed. I think that one of the problems with Maresca is it's a fairly prescriptive style. We've seen the outbursts he's had in public over certain players saying if he does that again, I think it was to Enzo, wasn't it? If he does that again, he'll come off the pitch. And you wonder whether he has the measure of that team. Now, listen, you can't argue with the fact that he's won the Conference League and the Club World Cup. I mean, that's a great haul. I would suggest that there may be a bit of defensive weakness there. I think yesterday, was it Tosin played in centre half, and Trevor Chalobah. That's not the greatest centre half partnership. I think Levi Colwill will be missed, as you said, Jonathan.
Fofana will be back, won't he?
Fofana, well, yeah.
Will he? I mean, how much?
Yeah. Reece James again. Nobody doubts Reece James' talent. Some of us may doubt his fitness. And that may be where it comes apart. But Maresca, it's funny, isn't it? Has he won over that Chelsea support? Because whenever I went to the Bridge last season, I felt there was a lot of doubt within the support there in him. But he's come through for the club. It's whether he can develop that affection that certain managers, Conte was idolised for a while, Carlo, obviously Jose Mourinho, whether he can get that connection with the fans. And it may require a more expansive style of play. And do you know what? Chelsea have the players to do that. It's whether he lets the leash off a little bit.
I mean, I think what really helped him was that Club World Cup final. It was so clearly a tactical triumph for him.
Yes.
Which brings us to our second big question, which is the Club World Cup. And what hangover will there be for Chelsea? Maybe also for City, though obviously they went out earlier. The calendar, fatigue. Jack, I mean, have you any sense of where Chelsea and City are, how they think the season's going to go? I know they've both had restricted pre-seasons, which maybe means they start slower, or maybe means they start quicker. I don't know. I feel it'll have an impact. I just can't work out what it is.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it could impact the start, or I guess could it theoretically impact the back end of the season? Like if maybe they'll start quicker and then by after a while, the fact they only had a 3-week break where they're competing against teams who had a much longer break through June and the start of July, maybe that's the point that it starts to bite. I don't know. I mean, I think with a lot of these kind of injury, fitness, schedule, fatigue related issues, where I think everybody's learning a bit, not least the teams and the players themselves. But what I think has been increasingly clear in the last year or two, I think, is that the players and teams cannot keep up with the combination of the workload that they have to do and the football that they want to play. They want to play a style of football which I think in the main is unsustainable. And I think I remember saying on this podcast towards the end of last season that I think this is my theory as to why Arne Slot succeeded so much at Liverpool, is that Slot built a way of playing that was repeatable twice a week, that didn't injure his players, that gave his players a bit more downtime, that wasn't trying to crank the intensity lever to 11 every single week. Because I think that the teams who have tried to crank the lever non-stop in the last year or so have actually found that the lever's broken and that the players can't do it. We saw the huge injury crises that various teams have had last season, not least Tottenham and Arsenal.
Newcastle, Bournemouth.
They want to. Teams want to play with intensity. Of course they do. Like physical intensity has been one of the biggest single trends in the last sort of 10 years. But I think that the workload on the players, but basically since they came back after COVID, so that's June, July 2020. And in the last 5 years, the workload has been so intense and is only getting more intense I do think that in some form or another, this particular issue will be one of the decisive factors in this season.
So, John, I guess that can go. There's two ways of dealing with that. You either have an incredibly deep squad, or as Jack says, you find a system where you can control games without going hell for leather, 100 miles an hour. And that's another thing that makes me sort of just think maybe Chelsea can do this, because Maresca football is not 100 miles an hour and they have a massively deep squad. I mean, which of those do you think will be decisive? Do you think teams will learn from Slot last season?
Well, I was going to say that of the two that went to the Club World Cup, Chelsea, despite going further in the competition, are better equipped to deal with it. I also have memories of teams that were playing early in the season for, say, maybe even back to the days of the Intertoto Cup or whatever, that would start brightly to the season because they were into their rhythm, and then would peg out sometimes around November, December because they were tired. Probably in the days of smaller squads. As we've spoken about previously on the pod, I fear for Manchester City's ability, well, this season, because we just don't, again, there's a great unknown about them, isn't there? There's an unknown about certain players, Rangers, Cherky, whether we'll see the new a revived Phil Foden. The team that we saw at the Club World Cup briefly looked like it could be very, very good, and then fell apart. It's there was this talk, wasn't there, of microdosing training where they're barely doing anything and just basically keeping their levels up. It's going to be an experiment for all of them. It's probably been on Pep Guardiola's mind, as so much is, over the summer. We're just going to have to see with both of them. But I do think Chelsea are better equipped. And do you know what? There's a lot of confidence around Chelsea that there perhaps isn't around City.
And with that thought, as to make sure we don't become fatigued, to make sure we don't enter the red zone, let's have a break and we'll come back in the second half and deal with questions 3 to 5. We'll see you then. Welcome back to the second half of Libero 43. I'm with Jack Pitt-Brooke and John Brewin, and I'm still Jonathan Wilson. And I think the big theme of this summer has been the return of a number 9. Everybody is hunting strikers. We've seen Gyökeres, Šeško, Isak, Victor Osimhen. Ollie Watkins has been linked with various clubs. So it suddenly feels that strikers are popular again. Jack, is number 9 back? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell, number 9's never gone away. What I was hoping was that this would be more of the... I guess the question really is this big man summer? Because big man summer is Wout Weghorst, it's Nicholas Füllkrug, who sadly has not made as much of an impact as I was hoping for so far at West Ham United, but they're still this year.
He did score in the summer series.
He's looked quite good in over the summer, I'm told, so yeah.
Friend of the show, Salomon Rondon, who I'm still hoping may yet come back to the Premier League this summer. Could be, if Newcastle United are getting really desperate at the end of the window, we could see another Premier League stint for Rondon. No,
who was he playing for at the Club World Cup? Was it Pachuca? He was definitely at the Club World Cup.
I think, isn't he back in Spain? I thought he's at a sort of small La Liga team. Real Oviedo. No, on loan from Pachuca. Real Oviedo on loan from Pachuca. Nailed it.
Stuff. Nailed it. Well done.
His birthday is hang on, I know this. It's the 16th. He shares a birthday with Neville Southall. I think it's the 16th of September.
Does he share an age with Neville Southall? I mean, he has been around a bit.
But weight's getting a bit closer as well these days.
yeah. Actually, it'd be good to see Neville Southall back actually in the Premier League, wouldn't it? But we're all for Big Nev.
But I think it's sadly we're not quite. I mean, it's not quite the sort of Wout Weghorst summer, but I do think it is interesting that one of the defining characteristics of a lot of these guys, not all of them, but is physicality. Like, I think Šeško will be physical, Gyökeres ideally will be physical, Delap is certainly very physical, and I was just thinking, like, this is one of those situations where you can identify the phenomenon, but it's kind of more interesting to identify the cause. And I've been talking to a few people I speak to who work in football, And the best theory I heard from them is that centre-backs nowadays are so physical, like, because you have to, if you're going to play a high line, for example, you need very athletic centre-backs to cover the space. Centre-backs are so physical that you need a physical centre-forward, basically, because otherwise like a nippy little centre-forward might not get anything out of them. But if if you're going to win anything in the box or win those 50-50s, then maybe you do need a big guy in order to get any kind of physical edge. So perhaps that explains why people want the kind of Delap type model.
And the one player I didn't mention there was Ekitike. Now, John, you saw him yesterday in the flesh. Now, I'd been led to believe from people who watched him regularly in Germany, he was a bit raw. That didn't look a raw player at all to me. Some of his touches were incredible. His movement was really good, took his goal incredibly well. And I think he's a great example of what the number 9 has become. I mean, I'm not saying he's absolutely a finished product yet, but he seemed a lot more finished than I'd been led to believe. But I think if you go back to sort of the 80s and you had the classic strike partnership, and it would always be the finisher and the creator or the finisher and the target man. And it seems with modern number 9, the best ones have elements of all three of those. They're finishers, they're poachers, they find space in the box. They can also work the channels. They're also good in the air. I mean, Šeško's 6'5", but lightning fast. Erling Haaland, already in the Premier League, is massive and really fast. Ekitike is massive and really fast. Isak, I mean, he's 6'4". He doesn't look 6'4" the way he moves. He's got such grace and fluency. But yeah, he's 6'4". So they're good in the air, but that doesn't mean they're sort of slightly lumbering figures who have to be sort of, it takes sort of a squad of 16 to rumble them up to the back post and then you knock the ball into them. They are these incredibly complete, very rare figures, and it suddenly seems everybody's decided, well, Haaland works in the Premier League for a top side. There's no sense of needing to link with the midfield in the way I think we'd thought a top number 9 had to. You can have a more orthodox figure, albeit the sort of this souped up orthodox figure where you're taking in this sort of composite role. But John, you saw Ekitike. How do you rate him? And do you think that's a fair assessment of where the number 9's going?
Yeah. And when you mentioned rawness, a couple of raw finishes maybe there. There was a header that we missed, and then Kirk has created a chance for him that he sort of smashed wide. You thought, if that had fallen to Mohamed Salah, who actually was not on anyone's wavelength in that game, you would expect it to go in. And Ekitike did a lot of dropping deep, working with, he worked particularly well with Florian Wirtz, which was a good start for Liverpool. Because, of course, another thing is, we've sort of almost seen the rebirth of the number 10, haven't we, that have come in there, that these playmakers, because you've got Cole Palmer, you've got Florian Wirtz, and, you would expect other teams to mirror that. When Jack's talking about physical defenders, you're talking about tall, speedy defenders, aren't you? You look at your average centre-half, there are very few of your Roberto Ayalas around these days, are there? The 5'10", the Passarella players or whatever. They are big units, and they're very, very quick. It feels to me that here's a question for you. Maybe a question for you, Jonathan. And it's so often over the recent years, we've watched these wingers that cut inside. Yeah, they cut inside. It's presumably the statisticians have worked out you're going to be more effective if you cut inside and you shoot than if you just cross it, because the cross is cleared more often than not. But are we going to see a return of this revolutionary thing where a left-footed winger plays on the left to cross in to people that are good at heading the ball in? Is that going to happen? Because it would seem to me, because football always change, it evolves, and things come back in and out, that this could be a revolutionary tactic that might actually work for teams.
Well, and there was a great example of it last season. Was it against Arsenal that Newcastle scored when Anthony Gordon, playing on the right, putting a right-footed cross, an outswinger, and Alexander Isak met it with a beautiful header. And you sort of, I don't know, it was like going into a museum and seeing a goal from the 50s, and it was something really sort of, almost quite stirring about it. Oh, that's what it used to be like. It's like, I don't know if you're aware of Beamish Museum, which is sort of lived museum in the northeast.
Yes,
It has
yes, yeah.
5 different zones of different periods. Great museum, well worth visiting. But it felt a little bit like the football equivalent of that. Part of the joy, of course, is when you get old enough to go, oh, I remember that from my childhood. Yeah. So it's possibly, I mean, I think the reason why there was that move to wingers cutting in, and this is, Jack said the number 9's never gone away, and of course you're right. I looked at 10 years ago who were the top scorers in the league, so 14-15. The 4 top scorers in the league: Sergio Aguero, Harry Kane, Diego Costa, Charlie Austin. All pretty typical, wow. in slightly different ways, pretty typical number 9s. So they never went away. But I think there was a sense that at the very highest level of the game, in sort of the tactical vanguard, in the Guardiola zone, there was something a little bit déclassé about having a proper number 9. You wanted somebody who could drop off, somebody who created space. You wanted, perhaps it was Messi playing there, perhaps it was Roberto Firmino, even Aguero. Guardiola tried to encourage him to sort of to drop off, to move about. Harry Kane drops off. One of the things he's always criticised for England, which seems nonsensical to me, is he doesn't play in the box enough. But look at it. The reason Son scored so many goals for Spurs was often Kane dropping off, spinning, playing the ball in behind him. But so centre forwards had this role of creating space. But who are they creating space for? It's either a number 10 breaking forward, or actually I think probably more effective is those wide players, the inverted wingers cutting in field into that space they've left. And the reason that's so dangerous, and I remember Alex Ferguson talking about this when he was playing Rooney on the left and Ronaldo through the middle, before we sort of accepted Ronaldo as actually a very typical number 9 by the end. But when he first moved there, he would drop off, he'd pull wide, he was good in the air still, but he was about creating space for Tevez and for Rooney. And what Ferguson said, it struck me as being such an obvious thing, and yet such a thing nobody had ever explained to me before, is football now at the highest level for forwards is about creating space. And if you think of a player running straight, there is not much space. If they run on the hypotenuse, there is more space. You've created the space by creating an angle. Not only that, but if you have a right-footed player playing on the left against an orthodox right-footed right-back, you're attacking that player on his weaker foot. So having players attacking on the diagonal is incredibly dangerous. And that's why I think over the last sort of 15 years or so, maybe even 20 years, we've seen so many of these goal-scoring wide players. Messi, clearly a sort of a supreme example of a low, such a good player that maybe normal rules don't apply to him. But Mohamed Salah is a great example of a player who scored loads and loads of goals from wide. That top scorer system 2014, the player who's 5th, Alexis Sanchez. So another player who attacked from wide. So Jack, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting in the case of, both City and Liverpool have maybe followed the same path here, in the sense that I don't think City have ever played better football than they did before they signed Haaland. And they had that season when they had either Foden or De Bruyne, like kind of as a 9 but dropping backwards. They played unbelievable football, though they've been more successful since they signed Haaland. And obviously, in the case of Liverpool, like the best Liverpool team of the last few years, as you said, was with Firmino as a false 9, like not really a conventional 9, but allowing him to create the space for Mane and Salah. But now they've got Ekitike, and they're obviously in the market for Isaac as well. So I wonder whether those two examples point to teams moving away from the false 9 model, as you said, towards something more conventional.
Yeah, and I think this is it's there's been a general, backlash is maybe too strong a term, but there has been a movement away from that sort of very extreme Guardiola football, not least by Guardiola himself, who obviously brought in Haaland. And that first season, while there was clearly some degree of tension there, some degree of friction, it was creatively useful, and they win the treble. So, John, do you think this return for number 9, and maybe, as you said, a more orthodox vision of a number 10 as well, is part of this general questioning of that Guardiola model of everything's got to be about possession, everything's got to be about movement, everything's got to be about space? You can go back to more orthodox principles.
Well, you can be effective by playing a different style of football. I think actually Arne Slot's team last season showed quite a bit of that Liverpool were happy to take the sting out of games and not play at the 100 miles an hour football that had been successful before. I wonder if their success was as a result of a weakened Premier League, a sort of, a period of change. We're going to find that out very soon. But, you look at the other teams around them. Arsenal, having been that very high-pressing team, don't really play that style of football, do they? It's a bit more aggressive. It's a bit more physical. Did they... yeah. Actually, I was going to correct you on something. You said Ronaldo. End to the end. Now, my nephews watched Ronaldo play on Thursday night for Al Nassr against Rio Ave in a pre-season friendly, score a hat-trick. They don't think he's finished. So there you go.
Well, if you're scoring hat-tricks against Rio Ave, then, you're clearly still have a lot of fuel left in the tank. So should we move on to question 4? So Newcastle were one of 3 English clubs last season who won trophies who you'd say are not familiar with winning trophies. Crystal Palace, Tottenham being the other 2. You can maybe include Villa in a similar category in that although they didn't win anything last year, they had a lot of fun playing in the Champions League and they had a lot of great set pieces. Yeah, it feels that, Crystal Palace have just won the Community Shield, so maybe this isn't entirely fair, but there's ongoing talk that Mark Gay could leave, that Eberechi Eze could leave, and I think if both of them left, that would be a crisis for them. So how do we assess? Let's start with Palace, but let's assess those 4 teams who all seem to have gone from having hugely enjoyable seasons to slightly frustrating summers. So, John, Palace.
Palace were excellent at Wembley, and Oliver Glasner is a fine manager who I think Palace are going to struggle to keep hold of. Let's check the date here. A year from now, he's probably going to be Bayern Munich manager or something like that. He is that good a manager. He seems to have the golden touch. But will he have the golden touch without Eze, who... The problem is, Eze may be too expensive for other teams to buy. Gueye less so. And I think that's possibly the equation that Palace are going to have to do. Gueye was excellent in that second half when Palace took control against Liverpool. Gueye is an excellent player. He was brilliant for England, wasn't he, in 2024? A very unheralded player. But Palace, trust their own processes. They're another team. They're not as fashionable as your Brentfords, Brightons, Bournemouths. But, they won the FA Cup. They'll be okay because they've got trust in Glasner for however long that lasts.
But I think there is a frustration there, isn't there? And Glasner sort of expressed it last week.
That they haven't bought the players, yes.
That he felt last season the start was undermined by the fact that I think they put in 4 players on deadline day. It took him a long time to work out what he's going to do with them, get them embedded into his system. But I guess the problem that Palace have is they got these 2 huge stars who they're trying to work out what to do with them. Gay's contract, he's going to his final season. So maybe they think, well, better to get some money now than no money next summer. Between them, you probably get 90, 100 million for them. And obviously, if you suddenly have that,
Jonathan, they would want much more than that. The problem with Eze for other players, other teams, is he's 27. They probably want 70, 80 million for him.
The Gary last year contract is, 30? Yeah, so it's around about 100.
The way that the transfer market works these days, because at 27... There's no resale value into the amortisation and all that stuff. He's possibly not a deal that clubs can do.
But given that they have those 2 players that they could sell for huge money, that makes it much more difficult to bring players in. But should we move on to Tottenham, Jack? They've had an odd summer. Maddison getting injured, failing to land Gibbs-White. Kudus, Palhinha, 2 big players have come in. Before they play in the Super Cup, how do you assess them?
Yeah, I think the example of Spurs, a bit like Newcastle, maybe to a lesser extent Palace, just underlines that you can't always... The positive vibes of winning a trophy don't always last as long as you might think. Like Spurs fans right now are not happy with how this summer's gone. They've signed 2 players who I think will improve the first team, Kudus and West Ham, and then Palhinha on loan from Bayern. They've signed, they've turned Mathys Tell's loan move from Bayern permanent. They've signed Kota Takai, who's a young Japanese centre back. But I think the hope was from a lot of fans that being back in the Champions League, will be a big summer of reasserting our place in the transfer market and so on. And actually, they've seen a lot of fans are annoyed because they've seen Man United, who they beat in the final of the Europa League, go out and spend more money on more ready-made, good-to-go players than Tottenham have done. And during the course of which time, Tottenham have lost. Well, Son's gone to LA. Madison's done his ACL and will be out for quite a while. Kulusevski's still got a knee injury, which he had from the end of last season. And so the team that they put out on the first, when they, I think in the Super Cup on Wednesday evening, and then in the Premier League this weekend, will probably be worse than the teams they had at the back end of last season. They've changed the manager as well. There's been a huge amount of change behind the scenes, overall, I'd say the positive vibes of Bilbao have not necessarily been carried all the way through into August.
And I know this is a huge question, John, but Newcastle in a similar boat. Isak obviously is the key to that, and exactly what happens with him. That sense of the Saudis retrenching and becoming less interested in their non-Saudi based assets appears to have been borne out by another summer of frustration for them.
Yeah. You're almost back to sort of almost like Mike Ashley levels of frustration, aren't you? And which is amazing to consider. Some may laugh at that, but you've got to have sympathy for Newcastle fans who had that, years of pain. This is the problem of, I suppose, false messiahs coming in with the promise of all this stuff. And the problem that they've got is that Saudi Arabia are interested in lots of other stuff. Abu Dhabi, when they came in at Manchester City, were only interested in Manchester City and expanding it from there. Roman Abramovich, when he went in at Chelsea, was Chelsea, Chelsea, Chelsea. That's what he was going to operate on. They are a victim of the diversification of Saudi Arabia's interests. And the thing is with the Isak thing, it's a classic transfer story that I've often told, which is player wants to join better team and will leave, which, you go back to Blackburn to Alan Shearer, that's what happens in football. And they're a victim of it. And the thing is, for some reason, certain Newcastle fans felt that shouldn't be the case anymore. But unfortunately, it hasn't happened. And also, listen, the rules have changed since Manchester City, had their gold rush. The rules were changed for a good reason. And Newcastle are on the end of that. And also, the Saudis maybe weren't the golden ticket that they thought they were going to be. Have sympathy, but I also think there should have been a bit more caution at the start of it, because you never know how these things are going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, PSR, certainly they feel has restricted them. But I mean, as you say, it's partly because they spent so much so early.
They spent 400 million, yeah.
Yeah. And Villa, another club, who are dealing with PSR restrictions. And I think their summer felt pretty flat. I think the fact they failed to qualify for Champions League.
That final day.
Such a bizarre final day, such a weird defeat at Old Trafford where nobody was losing at Old Trafford and suddenly Villa do. They're in the Europa League. It feels like a step backwards. The players had on loan, Rashford, Asensio, are not made permanent. I mean, bringing in Evan Guessin from Nice seems to answer some of the need they have for a player who can play across the front line. But it still feels that this is a summer of retrenchment there. So, but another club finding that there is somehow a barrier there that prevents them from breaking through. Is that? I mean, I know PSR is an enormous topic, Jack, but is that fair?
Yeah, I do think it's fair. I don't want to, maybe let's save the kind of argument for and against PSR for another show, but I definitely think that, I mean, it's beyond question that it creates a sense of frustration for lots of fans, because I think lots of fans think that there ought to be no limits on my team can spend as much as they want in order to get to the top. And they think that for the understandable reason that they've seen other teams do that in the last 20 years.
Well, and some teams seem able to sort of find loopholes in PSR that I mean, Newcastle haven't. And that's an interesting topic. But I think you're right. I think that's too big for the final 5 minutes of this episode.
Villa have attempted a couple of them themselves.
Well, yeah.
And listen, Monchi and Unai Emery will have plans for the close of the transfer window. They'll be moving around of players, shifting the decks. Both manager and sporting director are used to operating, well, let's say, on the very fringes of how this operates, aren't they? They both there's still faith in Unai Emery. There still should be faith in Villa because they're a good team. I mean, it's not like they're a bad team and they've suddenly all fallen apart. They were very close to the Champions League. They haven't significantly lost everything. The family silver hasn't been sold off or anything like that.
Yeah. And now the fifth hour 5 questions. And we did touch on this to an extent on Friday. But can any of the promoted sides stay up? Leeds and Burnley got 100 points. That's never happened before. Sunderland have spent, well over £100 million. Seem to have a much stronger squad now. But can any of them actually cling on, Jack?
Well, I think the interesting thing here is that, Sunderland is kind of a slightly different case because they weren't one of the dominant teams in the regular season. The two managers of the promoted teams, Daniel Farker and Scott Parker, are both promotion specialists. Parker's got 3 different teams promoted to the Premier League already, which, given he's only 44, is quite something. Parker, I think this is Farker's 3rd promotion to the Premier League as well, having got 2 different ones with Norwich City, and now one with Leeds United. But neither of them have ever really made any much of an impression at all on the Premier League with any of the teams they've got promoted. And it was no secret that at the end of the season, Leeds United were thinking very seriously about going for a different manager before deciding ultimately to stick with Farker. So I guess the question, will it be any different for those teams than will it be any different for those managers now than in their previous attempts at the Premier League? I mean, I don't know really. Certainly the evidence of the last 2 seasons, how badly the promoted teams have done in the Premier League, suggests that the gap is very big. It's two years in a row that all 6 have gone straight back down. That did so last season with combined 59 points, even less than the combined 66 points the previous season. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible to come up and stabilise yourself. Fulham came up in 22-23. Bournemouth came up the year before that. They're now established mid-table teams. Forest. So it can be done. I just don't know whether in either case, Burnley or Leeds might regret. I wonder how they think they could have done differently with a manager, perhaps. Would it have made sense to go for a different man? I don't know. I genuinely don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, I think Sunderland signings give me... It's a glimmer. I'm not saying they're going to stay up, but there's a glimmer of hope that wasn't there on the day that they beat Sheffield United in the playoff final. But I guess the question is, say one of those teams can get to 34 points, 35 points, which of the other 17 teams could conceivably finish below them? And I think that's the question of who can you target? And I'd say, we mentioned Brentford earlier, lots of questions there. We don't know. West Ham, so Sunderland play West Ham on the opening day. It's almost like a 6-pointer.
It's a 6-pointer, yeah.
First day of the season.
West Ham, quietly, and they're often not that quiet, we're lurching into crisis club stuff. The type of thing where, obviously I live in the East End of London, where fans talk of a relegation season, and West Ham fans are used to this over the years, and there's been a lot of disquiet over the fact that a sporting director came in, didn't last long, and now the co-chair, I think he's just chairman now, isn't he, is running the club top to bottom, sporting director for himself, buying players. Graham Potter did not do much to convince the West Ham fans last season. They were barely much better than they were under Julian Lopetegui. And I wouldn't be that impressed with their summer dealings. So Hammers could be one. We'll have to see how Everton go.
We mentioned them.
Yes, we've got them all mentioned. And as regards your semi-belief in Sunderland, I think you're right about the transfer dealings. But then I saw the name Arthur Masuaku appear, and I began to wonder.
An alarm bell there, yeah.
I began to wonder. Listen, great attacking player, actually. Very, very good fun to watch. Defensively, maybe not the best. So let's see how your Black Cat heroes go there.
He's just covered for Dennis Sirkin. That's what I'm telling myself.
Okay, fine.
So we've done our 5 questions. Thank you very much to Jack Pitt-Brooke. Thank you very much to John Brewin. Thank you very much for listening. Do remember, please, to rate, review, and recommend us. And we'll see you next time.